Hello, this is Ralph. So if you're like me, that you are looking for more than the philosophy material out there and truly wish to get to the bottom of the question you have using philosophy, well, I think there's an approach of doing philosophy that I think is worth trying. You see, I think it's very much like learning to play tennis. Just as one cannot learn to play tennis by simply looking at the factual information of the great player in the past, their iconic styles and moves, or simply by studying the physics of tennis. Similarly, I also think that one cannot learn to practice philosophy by simply looking at the theories and sayings from the philosophers of the past, or simply by studying logic outside of the context of a philosophy discussion. I think learning about these are great for carrying out a conversation about tennis or philosophy, but in order to really play, I think somewhere down the line you just have to practice hitting the ball. And similarly, to practice philosophy, I think one just have to dive in and practice making actual judgments. And I'm talking about a very specific kind of judgment, where one tries to judge examples that are found in real life or in imagined scenarios, that they fall into the category of love, justice, or any recurring concepts in philosophy. I know this might sound complicated, so here's an example which I'm suggesting we should do. Let's say there's this person A, whom is uncertain about whether to stay in a relationship. Because although he might feel something, he's not sure whether this feeling is love. So in this scenario, love is the concept in question. So A should park aside this case as well as any questionable example and focus on those that he can honestly and readily judge to be real love. And again, these examples could come from real life, literature, or imagined scenarios. Then, what A needs to do is to find commonalities among these examples. For instance, it could be that A found genuine affection in every example that he considered as love. And with a bit of logic, we need to see if these commonalities are necessary or sufficient for what A considered as love. For commonalities that are necessary, aka necessary conditions, the narrower are always better, and we can narrow them down by adding additional conditions that makes them only cover the example that A considered as love. Again, in this example, A might find that having genuine affection towards a complete stranger may not sound too much like love, so this will be a counterexample to the hypothesis that genuine affection equals love. And after looking through all the examples that A considered as love, A might find that it might also be necessary to have some genuine concern in order for A to consider as love. By adding this additional condition, now the necessary condition becomes having genuine affection as well as concerning for the well-being. And this new necessary condition is better than the original one, as it is narrower as well as better matching A's judgment of what is love, because it excludes the counterexample of an attractive but unconcerning stranger. Starting with the necessary condition is one way of doing it. Another way of doing it would be to start with a sufficient condition. The only difference is, instead of narrowing it, for the sufficient condition, we need to expand it. But this probably deserves another video, and you should already know about these basic logics if you're not completely new to philosophy. In general, the goal is to find a combination of conditions that covers each and every examples that A considered as love, and aka this is the simultaneously necessary and sufficient condition. This is no easy task, and realistically, I think people should stop whenever they cannot come up with a counterexample. Because when the conditions match with each and every example A considered as love, logically it is equivalent to A's notion of what love is. And A should treat these conditions as a workable definition for love, at least before he can find a counterexample. At the end of the day, this insight may or may not help A to decide what to do in this relationship. But having this insight about how he personally judged what is love, he still has a choice of whether to apply this insight to his relationship or not. This exercise or method is just a way of studying yourself, specifically your way of judging, using examples and logic. So if you are interested in this exercise, then I think there are 3 prerequisites that are worth mentioning. First of all, you have to have the intent to practice making judgment on specific examples. And this will require you to hold back reciting quotes from philosophers, as well as throwing the towel by saying everything is relative or nothing is certain. Second is that you need to know a little bit about logic, and a little does goes a long way. Just familiarize yourself with the concept of necessary, sufficient, correlation, and really trying to apply them in your thinking. Together with the Venn diagram, I think it would address over 90% of the philosophical questions. And lastly, you have to be brutally honest to yourself about your feelings toward the example that you use in this process. Saying I don't know is always valid, as long as it is consistent with how you feel and how you actually judge about these examples. To break down of what we just did, it depends on how you would like to group them. It can be seen as 4 main steps or 7 baby steps. The first main step is to be honest about your original question and try to philosophize it. And this step consists of 2 baby steps. Revisiting your original questions in life. Think again of the scenario, whether it is okay to stay in a relationship or to comply to authority, etc. The key here is to be honest. And the second baby step will be to identify the key concepts that you need to make judgments. This will require the will to make actual judgments and don't dodge the questions. The second main step is to form premises by deducting from the example that you are sure of. The baby steps involves focusing on examples that you are sure of, part aside the controversies or examples that you are uncertain of. This requires honesty. Example can be drawn from imagination or personal experiences, but only those you can judge. And you are the key, as you are only speaking for yourself and you're not speaking for anyone else. Another baby step will be to find the commonalities among the example you are sure of. Again, honesty is the key. The next baby steps is to see whether the commonalities are necessary or sufficient or simply just correlated. The third main step is to form and refine your conclusions. This requires you to refine your conditions and aim for the simultaneously necessary and sufficient condition. And this would require logic again. In the case where you cannot find a conclusion, at least you can find the exceptions to that conclusion. Or if you cannot deduct any conclusion at all, you can still admit that you're not rational in this matter. After all, we are just human. We don't have to be rational all the time. The fourth main step is to apply your conclusions. Now is the time to apply this new insight to the original questions which you are uncertain of. And this would obviously require your will to make actual judgments. Now you can choose to apply the conclusion to your originally uncertain example. Or if you still feel uncertain, I think it's alright if you keep your original point of view. But at least you know. Your original example is unique to each and every example you can think of. I think this is just a good information to have, knowing that you are in a very unique situation. So, if you like what you hear and might even consider giving this method a try, I think I should at least tell you a little bit about the consequences about this method that I can think of. I'll start with some good consequences. The first is obviously self-knowledge and not guessing about how you make judgments, but you actually know how you do. From this exercise, you're simply treating your judgment as an observation and trying to find patterns like a scientist studying a natural phenomenon. So when someone asks you about concepts such as love and justice, instead of recalling what you heard or feel about this concept, now you can really know the principle that governs your judgments about these concepts. This exercise will give you the knowledge of personal principles that allow you to decide whether to change them or to stick with them. And this gives you the possibility of becoming a person of principle. And in the event where you fail to find such personal principles, or you find yourself in situations where these principles no longer apply, then at least you know this is where your rationality stops, which again is good self-knowledge. And it could even be romantic to know that you are in a situation or you found someone where your personal principle no longer applies. But I just hope this does not happen too often to any mature person. I think it's just easier to compare notes if we are able to identify our own principles and to share them with each other. If enough people take this approach, I think it's just easier to find people who share common principles. And this just makes the world a less lonely place, as I think everyone longs for someone who understands them and share their same value, and principles. We often find statements where people state about what human nature is, and instead of accepting them or reject them based on gut feeling, taking this approach, if we can find many people sharing the same principle, we can actually verify something about human nature, at least how we humans judge about these important concepts. And this might even be a different kind of scientific study. So lastly, it is pretty clear that this will help you learn something about yourself or even maybe humanity. But because this is nevertheless a new discovery, it could change your existing belief, and thus might even affect your sense of belonging in your existing social groups, such as your nation or your family. So this is obviously not for the faint-hearted, but you have been warned. But if these consequences are what you desire and willingly accept, I invite you to join me in the next video, where we begin to explore specific topics using this approach. I hope to see you there.